This is Keys to the Shop, episode 335, a better business model for coffee farmers, with Thaleon Tremain of Pachamama Coffee. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm so glad to have you along today. And really quick, if you would subscribe to the show, you'll always be updated with new episodes as they come out. Just hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now. And also, if you really want to help the show out, which I so appreciate, it would be great for you to share these episodes. Share the show with a friend or your team, other professionals that you know, because the content here is designed to help people thrive in their careers and in their businesses in specialty retail coffee. And I really appreciate all of you who have already done that. Now, in addition to this podcast, Keys to the Shop also offers consulting and coaching. That's where I get to work directly with you to either help you get your business started off on the right foot, to help you walk through the process of laying good foundations and avoiding needless mistakes in establishing a really great coffee shop. Or Keys to the Shop can help your existing business by leveling up your operations, your quality, your people. And if you're interested, I'd love to have a conversation with you. To schedule a free discovery call, simply email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode of Keys to the Shop is brought to you by the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer from Voga Coffee. The Ground Control Brewer uses SCA award-winning technology to revolutionize your coffee, basically helping you extract flavors from your coffee that you never thought possible and giving you such control over that process that it's like getting to know your coffee all over again. This is one of the true innovations in the field of coffee technology that makes a huge difference in what your customers experience with batch brew coffee. And not only is it amazing for batch brew coffee, but it also creates tea, batched iced lattes, batched cold brew. So there's a lot of versatility and efficiency in this machine. And if that all sounds really attractive to you, and I don't blame you if it does, then you definitely need to reach out to them. Check their website out over at groundcontrol.coffee to find out more information to level up your coffee experience. Again, that is groundcontrol.coffee. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series. The Barista Series' extensive lineup of plant-based performance beverages are designed for the professional barista, and each one of the products is tested by professional baristas before you get it in your hands. That's why it performs so well. Stands up to the heat from the steaming process, creates awesome texture for amazing latte art designs, and also it keeps the balance of the beverage focused on the coffee. Your customers are absolutely going to love this. You should reach out to pacificfoodservice.com, get it in your store, and try it. If you're wanting to serve your customers the absolute best in plant-based beverages, then you have to be using the Barista Series from Pacific. All right, everybody. Well, today we are going to be talking in depth with somebody who has been on the show before, but we didn't really get to include the entire discussion with him because we were doing a more narrative style podcast for the sustainability series. Today, we're talking with Thaleon Tremain, who is the CEO and co-founder of Pachamama Coffee Cooperative, which is a vertically integrated cooperative that represents more than 240,000 smallholder coffee farmers around the world. It was launched in California in 2006. And Pachamama is the first coffee roaster in North America to be 100% owned and governed by farmers in Africa and Latin America. And Thaleon has led Pachamama Coffee's formation and growth since 2003. Pachamama Coffee is wholly owned by its 5 member cooperatives and its board of representatives, and it's entirely composed of farmer representatives. And Pachamama allows farmers to maintain quality control of their roasted coffee while creating a brand and a simple path to share their story with their customers. Thaleon's passion for the cooperative business model began at an agricultural cooperative in rural Bolivia, where he worked as a Peace Corps volunteer in the mid-90s. In pursuit of a better ownership and governance structure for economic development, Thaleon is a dedicated advocate for the cooperative model. And in today's conversation with Thaleon, we're going to be exploring this model that they've created with Pachamama that is putting so much power into the hands of the farmers. And I think that is something that is very inspirational They just won the SCA Sustainability Award last year for a business model for a reason. And we go into detail in this conversation with Thaleon about the beginnings and founding of Pachamama, its goal and the problems that it's trying to solve, why it's important to be patient in investing into long-term solutions, in establishing a brand that the customer recognizes, and just the possibilities of this farmer-owned model for the coffee industry. I loved getting to talk to him for the Sustainability Series episode, and I'm glad that we get to hear a lot more from him in this one. So here now is my conversation with the CEO of Pachamama Coffee, Thaleon Tremain. Well, Thaleon, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. How are you?
I'm doing great. Chris, thanks for having me.
I say welcome back, and it's an honor to have you back because we interviewed you before the pandemic, but then the episode came out after, well, the main part of the pandemic for our sustainability series. And we heard a little bit from you in that episode, but I don't think we heard enough. And I really was impressed with, all I was reading about and hearing about in our full conversation about Pachamama and the structure and the change that it's making. So I'm excited to really explore this in our conversation. So I guess the logical place to start is to sort of ask the question, what is Pachamama Coffee, and what sets it apart from other organizations, like cooperative organizations in coffee today?
Yeah, great. Well, we welcome the opportunity to talk about Pachamama and this unique business model. So thanks for having us, Chris. It's really nice to be back again after a couple of crazy years here in the business. Pachamama Coffee is a roaster retailer based here in Sacramento, California. And what makes this really unique is that we're a global cooperative that's entirely owned and governed by small-scale farmer co-ops in 5 different countries: in Peru, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Mexico, and Ethiopia. So what we've done, and what these coffee farmers set out to do about 20 years ago, is to organize themselves globally in order to roast coffee and to serve end consumers more directly. In doing so, I think the intention was to make their lives better and more economically sustainable over the long haul, for not only for them, but for the consumers of their coffee as well. So that's kind of Pachamama in a nutshell. We're like a lot of small roasters. We've got a few cafes and a few more in the pipeline, a long-time wholesale program. Increasingly, we sell more and more coffee directly to consumers online. Fully integrated sort of roaster, retailer, producer group combination. That's Pachamama Coffee Cooperative. The roots to this co-op sort of began back around 2000. I got involved shortly thereafter in just the organizational phase of building a co-op, building a business model really from the ground up this way. That took a few years actually of organization. In getting the members in place, the bylaws, the board of directors, the true ownership, right? The ownership and the governance that this model is built on, that had to happen over the course of a few years prior to 2006. Then the fun stuff began, trying to sell coffee and roast it and brew it and all those things you got to do, I think, to be a really complete specialty coffee roaster retailer.
When you're in that phase of laying the groundwork organizationally, it's, you're driven by this goal in knowing, I think, ahead of time that once you get those pieces in place and you get the right people and the right seats and all that it's going to impact, like you said, like the reason it was founded, the lives of the farmers. And so I imagine that was a lot of what was fueling what patience was needed to make that happen the right way, rather than just forcing it into maybe a typical model or something that wasn't so groundbreaking. So I guess the question I have is, what is the importance of, that organizational step? You talked about governance and ownership. That's to me, like the key to this whole thing is how it switches the power differential in the equation of coffee, from the consumer side to the farmer side. And so when you were doing that work, what did it take to make sure that that was in place? And how did you stay focused and motivated during that time?
Great question. So I think what really brought us all together was the beauty of this business model. I think that the farmer groups themselves loved the concept of a cooperative and helped to form this model as well, but they loved the idea that it was a cooperative, that it was going to be governed in the way that they themselves are governed. Our members are cooperatives as well, and that they were being included in the boardroom and with ownership and all these kinds of things. And so building that foundation around the financial incentives of ownership, true participation and control of their own destiny. So, I think that's what ownership provides. And the cooperative model was just very unique in that this was a way for really these national groups, that our co-ops are second level co-ops like Coca in Peru, that represent quite a few local co-ops. But this is a way and they had organized themselves nationally. This is a way for them to work on a global level with similar cooperatives. And, so having that vision from the beginning was really the key thing. And for me too, and for the people involved here in the United States. And it took a lot of people, there's been a lot of people involved in this project from day one, and a lot of them are still with us as well. And it's because we all agreed. But here's the thing, at the end of the day, it's really about, we're trying to build long-term sustainability, a long-term business, that an institution that will serve the farmers and the consumers really well over a very long period of time. And so if you look at it, like who's the most important, if we can say this, but really the most important actors in the supply chain for coffee are got to be the consumers and the producers. They need each other more than anyone. And it's not to say that we don't need other players in there, but certainly we do. But those are the two. That's where the money starts, with the consumer, and it flows back towards the producer. But in order for there to be great coffee, the producers have to benefit, and they've got to be able to profit. And so, this was just a way for these producers to connect directly with consumers. And we did it in a way that they were familiar with, and we got the right people, and they led it themselves, specifically Raul del Aguila from Coca in Peru, Marilyn Presa, Prode Co-op Nicaragua, Carlos Reynoso, Manos Campesinos, Guatemala, Tadesse Muscala from Oromia Coffee Farmers Cooperative Union in Ethiopia. These guys, amongst others, but they really had the vision in the early days, and so they took it upon themselves to organize Pachamama from the producer side. And that's the way it should be. And I think that's why we've survived, because our producers have real skin in the game, and they know they trust us, and because in fact we work for them. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, you work for farmers.
And we do, and that's a great. For me that's great, but I think it's great for them as well, because it changes the dynamics. And no one wants to satisfy the consumer more than the farmer. They have the greatest financial incentive to do so. And so this works really well, because then it allows me and the staff here in the United States to be very focused on what we do well, which is serving that end consumer and finding different ways to get to them. That's all we have to do. That's what we're hired to do. And the better we do it, and the more value we create for the farmers, the more profit that we can send back to them, helping them to connect directly with the people that really value their coffee the most. So I think that, and then it's just a great business when you look at it that way, right? Because a lot of people want to get into the business here in the United States because the margins are so high. Coffee is being sold for $20 a pound. It's there's a lot of money to be made. In that sense, it's good financial argument for farmers to do this kind of thing, but they need to work collectively and they need to pool their resources because they have very limited resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, the beginning, you were talking about how people are so excited about this model. As compared to what? Because I know the status quo out there and what there might be holding farmers back from profiting from their labor is all they had available to them. And this is kind of, I would say, uncharted territory, especially when it was first started. And so the big problem that they're trying to solve with establishing this was what?
As opposed to what is, the farmers typically, even to this day, most commodity farmers are simply price takers. They've got no power, and they're always dependent on the buyer. And even if the buyer is generous and pays above market prices, that's very nice, but it creates dependency. And farmers and the leaders that run these co-ops, it's their job to run a business, and to really get these farmers out of poverty, they need financial independence. So this is a way for them to name their own price and become, the price maker, and shore up direct distribution to the end consumer that can really help stabilize their businesses, their co-ops. Obviously, we're not going to be selling all of our members coffee. That'd probably take a very long time for us to do that, but we can supplement their income significantly because they can make a lot of money selling roasted coffee, far more than they can selling green coffee, even at what most people would label ethical pricing. So it's really ultimately about, how do we really solve our long-term problems, and how do we do it ourselves? And so, they saw the need they saw the solution, and they took the measures necessary to make it happen, sort of, as opposed to sitting around and waiting for the next, top-down solution,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is always just making them more dependent on the next guy who might pay a little bit more, but they don't really create that value unless they're, selling something more than a commodity.
It seems to me that a lot of roasters, or that a lot of coffee companies in producing countries, are now starting to roast and internationally ship their coffees, a lot more so than at least when I started in coffee 20 some odd years ago. And I'm just curious about, over the course of Pachamama's development, when you started selling coffee in Davis, California, after laboring on the business model, I guess the first question is, when did you start to see the tide turn for the organization where it started to actually gain traction and be beneficial? And two, when did you notice that it started to influence and inspire other people to pursue similar means of reversing that power between consumer and producer?
Okay, I think a couple questions there. Yeah, I think it is nice to see that, a lot more farmers are roasting their own coffee and selling and marketing that coffee through the internet and other ways. And so I think there's a lot of people doing that, and we would love to see that. We're roasting coffee locally close to the consumer because that serves the consumer best. The freshest, fastest coffee, and to do things at a larger scale, I think you need to be closer to the consumer here in the United States. So, that's our philosophy with respect to roasting. But our producer groups do roast their own coffee for the local market, and someday we'd like them to roast for us as well. But I would say that, like, the thing to realize is the roasting itself doesn't add as much value as people might think. It's really the marketing, the selling of the coffee, namely the retail and the wholesale of the coffee. So initially we started off by, not roasting coffee at all for quite a few years. We outsourced the roasting, worked on the relationship with the consumer, right? Or the buyers, and we were selling wholesale, outsourcing the roasting and branding the coffee. So, there's much more value in sort of the branding, relationship side of things, as opposed to the roasting. Now, Now, you got to have a certain amount of scale to begin to roast. And so as we finally got to the point where we had that scale, maybe 10 years ago or so, maybe a little less than that, we realized we needed to roast our own coffee in order to maintain quality.
Mm-hmm.
And, it gets harder to outsource coffee as you get bigger too. And so that was a big turning point by bringing in the roasting. And around that time, shortly thereafter, we began to with the cafes as well. So, I think somewhere along the way, it's hard to pinpoint it all, but at some point, maybe a few years back, anyhow, I think we kind of reached a critical mass where, we've got enough scale here to really run the business with a profit and pay a lot of money up front for the coffee, pay the employees well, and satisfy our customers. So it's been a long journey. It hasn't been easy. We really limit ourselves. We really don't have access to capital in very little, and that's been one of the big challenges for us. So it's been hard to get scale when you can't invest much. So we solved that by starting early, and we've been doing this stuff for a long time now. So we just take baby steps, and now we're about to open up a new roastery next month. Actually, it'll be a big one. This will be our big roastery, and so that's a huge step forward, and we were able to self-finance that. The cooperative was. So somewhere along the way, you kind of reach the critical mass, and the brand takes on a sort of life of its own. And with that comes some great stuff. If for us, it did anyway. I think a really great culture within the organization. And, the fact that we've got quite a few baristas and production staff and roasters, we've gotten to be a nice community here of staff. And I think we have a really unique culture, one that's kind of embraces the service to farmers. And, we just keep it really simple. For us, it's just about creating value for these farmers every day,
mm-hmm.
And we just do our job, and then they take care of us, and we keep it. And so that's really simple. The financial, the whole incentives are all aligned to really serve the consumer as best as possible, and in doing so, that benefits the farmer in many different ways, and benefits the customers and the staff. Now, I don't know how influential or inspiring we've been to other models and cooperatives or efforts out there, but I hope we have been, and we try to inspire others, share our story. And that's can be done, and there are ways to be creative about how you organize and design your business from the beginning. And so when you are at the very early days of your business concept, think about laying out the design at the organizational level, not just your brand packaging and all that. But, wait a minute, how do I design the boardroom? How does that going to look? How do we build in that kind of participation by other stakeholders than just the owner? And so I think we've inspired people to think that way, and to really try to think it through from the beginning. Hopefully, by showing that you can have farmers in your boardroom, and showing that it's in fact really adds value and can be a really competitive advantage. I think that we're leading by example, and hopefully others are realizing it isn't that hard to bring some farmers into your boardroom. Actually, ownership may be more complicated in many respects, but power can be allocated to producer groups as well in the boardroom. And I think, hopefully that's something that I think any specialty coffee company could do if they wanted to.
I mean, again, where this statement you made a little bit earlier here was that they take care of you, like the farmers take care of you. And so many of us are used to having this idea that we're going to take care of the farmers, And with the model that you have now, it's the reverse, because so much of, they own it and it's theirs. They're the boss, and it's their coffee, and rightly so. And so that's a refreshing thing to hear. And the patience again comes up in my mind as you're talking about this. When we set up an organization for the idea of wanting to see change, there is a desire to see change right away and to see it start to pick up steam. And after all the years of building up to that critical mass for yourselves, you start to see a lot more fruit in the past several years than in maybe the first several years. And I guess the question that comes into my mind, like how many people are really willing to slog through building something from the ground up that's going to be pretty thankless and maybe not as fruitful in the beginning, versus people who want to use branding as a way to, like a salve on their conscience, to say, like, we're doing something really good. We're getting a lot of notoriety for doing something good. But it's maybe not as effective because really the roots aren't down deep enough.
Well, there's certainly a lot of that. There a lot of greenwashing and good washing and all those things. And the more successful, I suppose, alternative trade models are, the more, people are going to copy that. And we've certainly seen a lot of that kind of thing in recent years. But I think we just don't worry about that. We just do what we do, and we talk about, what makes us unique and different. And the fact that it's so hard to do, and that no one would want to, share ownership with farmers, and how complicated that can be, and how long it does take. Because of that, there are very few doing it, and so it does allow you, I think, some competitive advantage. And you got to communicate that to the market. But it's really hard to do something unique in coffee nowadays.
Yeah.
So you better find a way, one way or another. But that's what I said 20 years ago. I said, well, even then I was like, geez, there's a lot of coffee companies out here. We better be doing something really different. Otherwise, I'm not interested in. For me, from a marketing point of view and sales and all these other things, I just thought it was a great competitive advantage. Now, sure, it is hard to communicate, and we do kind of get lost a little bit in all the noise. But, if you just keep doing it, and, eventually I think all the dust settles a bit, and you see, what the legitimate models are, and the ones that are really kind of doing these things. So that's beginning to work for us too, and so we get the bigger, a few big corporations finally are starting to care about these things, and that's, and so when they want to look out there and see who's really doing this, there aren't that many names that come up in terms of real, true producer inclusion, equity, ownership and diversity, a lot of the things we're talking about today.
Yeah. So then you mentioned marketing as one of the main tools to make this work, and how the consumer is like key to making sure that the supply is consistent and branding well. And you mentioned this also in our last conversation about how branding is so important for Pachamama and creating a sustainable business model. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that from your perspective, why it's so important in the mix. And it's not just a matter of presenting the story, but it's also the brand and the way that you present, the packaging and, blends and things like that around the story.
Yeah, I think, branding is just very important, especially coffee. I mean, it's arguably more value created in the branding or the story, that overall non-coffee element of what we're buying, especially coffee, that value has gone up and up and up over the last 20 years. So there's just I think that's a reality. And because of that, we can see why so much of the money stays in the consuming country, because it's captured, it's coming from the brand and the story. So it's just a reality of it being very important. for us, and I mean, for any small business, you've always got to find a way to differentiate yourselves. We figured, let's just talk about, the ownership and what we do, as opposed to, we really never spoke much about, we have never branded ourselves, I should say, as fair trade, those kinds of more subjective terms. We just said, well, we're farmer owned, and we'll show you that. And with that, though, what we're really doing, right, is that we're sort of branding the company. And I think that that's where, we were maybe ahead of the curve. And I think that a lot of people now are more and more, like B Corp and others, they're really trying to brand the company. You're not just buying a product, right? You're buying from a company. And where do the profits go when you buy that, when you buy that cup of coffee from that store versus this other store, thinking a little bit beyond just the product. I think that's where it's got ahead. I hope consumers are figuring that out. In fact, I think they are, especially the younger generation is much more concerned about the company, the ownership behind the company. Do we really want to send more profits to another billionaire, or just walk across the street and put the money in a local company, So I think people are starting to think about that. And we've really tried to sort of brand the model and the company itself as a whole, and not just the product. I don't know how successful that is. I think it's starting to pay off more and more now. The holy grail, I suppose, for a lot of coffee companies trying to create a iconic brand that's so incredibly valuable. Mm-hmm. And I think the future, a lot of future brands are going to be built not just on product, but on the underlying company itself and the ownership structure.
It does seem that with all of what you were talking about earlier, greenwashing and the purchase, you may have purchased coffee that has a certain certification or from a company that you thought was making a difference, and come to find out that's really not. Especially in the age of transparency, it's becoming more evident that there's just a lot of shallow attempts to try to address something, but it's not really making that much of a difference. And I think maybe consumers are figuring out that maybe they shouldn't be trusting of brands. And in some ways, they might just give up on the idea of cause-based coffees or companies that are trying to make a difference, because they're all just marketing and they're all just lying. And so where somebody like Pachamama comes in is through slow and consistent offerings, just developing the model so that it's provable, it's transparent, it's there, and it's unique, restores some of the trust that the consumer may have been holding back, which really, I think when trust is involved, it jettisons a brand from just something nice to do to something you have to have.
That's right. And something that you want to advocate for and support on a deeper level, share with your friends and things like that. Yeah, I think you bring up some great points there. And, personally, one of the reasons I really have always been passionate about Pachamama is that I want to prove the cynics wrong. There's so many cynics out there, and they're going to say, oh yeah, it's all a bunch of BS. Well, not always. And, it can be done. And farmers can't do this again. Yeah, they can. Capitalism is terrible, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but not always. It can be done well, So I think that it is very important to lead by example in that respect, and to show that these things can happen, because we've heard it from so many different people over the years, and especially our producer members and directors, that just how you can't do this, you can't do that, and people begin to believe it. But then when they see that, in fact, oh my gosh, you guys pulled this off, it's pretty amazing, and maybe we can do it. And that's really inspiring. I think it's really important. And I think it is what you say, is you're talking about, there's a real risk here in our industry, in that we've oversold this concept of sustainability in coffee. And that may come home to roost a bit here in the future. And I think there are some unreasonable expectations that have been created, not by anyone specifically, but just, it's just happened over the years. And the consumer is probably not hearing the full story on sustainability. As that begins to come out, if you do run the risk of losing that trust. So trust and integrity, I think, you're trying to do something over the long run. Like we didn't, I think this is something you alluded to earlier, is that most people, everything's so short term, everything's got to pay off in 3 years. I'm going to cash out in 5 years. No one's thinking about, like, we set this out that, we're talking about 100 years. We're 150, I mean, why not build an institution and think about it, and lay down the foundation, the bylaws in the boardroom, the bylaws of the company, right? Very important. So that's the kind of stuff that, it may collect dust for 30 years, but then when when the company's worth a fortune and everyone's sitting around figuring out how they're going to leverage that or sell it and those things, it's really important. So, we built that kind of into the DNA of the business. So all those things, I totally agree. And I think what we as an industry need to do is show, don't tell. It's an awful lot of talk, but let's start showing it and doing it, and not just doing it for the sake of social media.
It's not very satisfying, Thaleon. I'm sorry. It feels much better to talk about it than to do it and not have anyone see it for a while.
Yeah.
As you've reached critical mass, and it's, you're starting this, the new roastery. And last year, I know, congrats, you won the SCA's Sustainability Awards for business model. Mm-hmm. And it seems like as you are successful, you become, or the goal might just be to become less unique, that more people would take on the challenge of building a 100-year company in 2022 and 2023, and they're going to start their first year of a 100-year company that makes a difference for farmers by bringing them into the boardroom like you have, or vice versa, or the farmers bringing you into the boardroom. So I think it's really awesome to see the fruit of all of your labors at this juncture as you increase your footprint in roasting, and you want to continue that trust-based brand and grow that. How do you maintain quality and feedback to the farmers about the quality of the coffee being sold to consumers? Because there's a lot of quality decisions that you can make in roasted coffee about what market you're going to be in, what consumers you're marketing to. Where does all of that fit in with Pachamama?
Yeah, that's a great question. As we grow and we get bigger now with more scale, it gets a lot easier to really provide the kind of feedback that our members can benefit from. So we certainly do that with respect to not only coffee and the quality that's being delivered, but the consumers looking for, what they're reacting to, what stories work, what taste profiles, and so that really helps our producers quite a bit, and it helps them in their bigger business as importers or exporters, I should say. We're certainly always doing that, and from our perspective, what we do is we're buying our members' coffee every year, once a year. We're buying, each harvest, right? And that coffee is going to last us for 10, 12 months, something like that. And so every year we're really trying to get better coffee, and we're encouraging our farmers to find ways to continue to produce better coffee and pay them more for it, and to get the consistency of the same regions. That's been hard over time because just lack of scale. But now that we're getting there, it's a lot easier on the sourcing side. And with the new facility out here in El Dorado Hills, we're going to have much more dedicated quality operations. So we're really looking forward to that. I think that's going to be something we're going to do a lot more in the next 10 years, whereby farmers and the cupping folks at different cooperatives working with our folks directly, visiting us here as we visit them as well in Nicaragua, Peru and other places. So, and even some interchange between their roasters and our roasters. So those are kinds of things that a lot more of that's coming here now with the new facility. That's a big part of it. And there's it isn't all just about how much money you can get out of each pound of coffee, but how you can help these producers in other ways. And sometimes we help them by connecting them with other roasters so they can sell more green coffee. It's as simple as that. So whatever they need, we're here to serve them and, try to open doors for them here.
And so when you make decisions on how to roast the coffee and the flavors you're going for with the coffee and you give this feedback, is it largely just based on, specialty coffee, common standards like the cupping score sheets and, is there a predominantly medium to dark roast that you focus on to get a higher number of people in the consumer market? Or is it like a mix of that in like the lighter roasted, trying to go for that specialized hip, coffee segment that's wanting something that's a little bit, some might argue, under roasted?
Sure.
How does that mix? How do you determine that mix to make it a successful brand and get a lot of consumers to purchase it?
Well, you can be very consumer oriented there. It's very, what does the customer want, not just what does the farmer want to sell. And so we find a good match for what our farmers have and what customers are looking for. But that we do a little bit of everything. So with the single origin coffees that we've got, that we consistently get from these members, that over the years we're really building up those the quality and the recognition for those origins. We sell those by their name, by the region, and typically medium to light roast. Really bring out the quality of those coffees. And then we've got blends and all various degrees of roast. So we do a dark roast, a light roast. And that's a response to what we think the market wants.
Right, and your stores especially seem like a great place to determine that. And I wonder, as you increase your roasting, other customers, such as larger corporations that want to get your coffee, grocery stores and things like that, they're going to have different standards that they communicate to you and ask you, can you do this much with this particular kind of quality? Because they know what their customers want. So now you're kind of getting feedback from people who have their own sets of customers that aren't direct customers of Pachamama.
Yeah, that's right. And, you diversify your sales. So, we want to have different kinds of customers. And so we're not relying on any one particular, and maybe we will work with some bigger types who want, something a little different. But I think you bring up a really great point there about the cafes, and that by having those cafes, that really took our quality to the next level. The roastery, when we added on the roastery, that was a huge step. No doubt about it. You just get better coffee when you roast it yourself than when you outsource it, I think. I think there's just something there to that. You got attention to detail. But when we added the next step, and what really took it to the next level was having the cafes and espresso bars. And so, we're really taking the coffee from the seed all the way to the cup, and able to taste it right in the same building and get pretty much instant feedback from customers and staff. And so that's really allowed us to dial in certain things and see what it is, what it is that people here want, and not just what sort of the conventional wisdom might be. So we've actually been doing dark roast from the beginning. That wasn't something we ever shied away from. But we've always had great dark roast. Like, really, we use the same single origin coffees, and we don't over roast it. And so we've got a great reputation as having like an exceptional dark roast coffee, because people just weren't doing it. Now I think, that's coming around a bit. But yeah, you got to keep your customers in mind and diversify a little bit. I think, like I said, we aren't always trying to grow super fast, but we just want to make sure we make it through the long run. And we got a long view here. And, we don't want to trip up at the starting line, So it is about, and finding these customers and bringing them in when you're ready for it. I think that's what makes it long-term viable business for everyone, really.
All of the work that you put in and looking back at this company, I'm curious what the highlights have been for you, like maybe things that you might be most proud of accomplishing, that bring the most inspiration after these 16 years.
That's a tough question. Well, maybe it's not, but I think it's just the community, like this family that we've created here, and a community that has really blossomed here in Sacramento, Northern California. But of course, with the producers and the producers from all around the world, and over years, you would create this pretty significant community here, and a lot of customers, and their reaction and the way they respond to Pachamama as being something more than coffee, and in our staff as well, and even the member farmers, I think everyone feels something that it's more than coffee, and that's just really inspiring, and it feels good. It makes me confident in the future of this business and in the future of coffee, because we've got a really strong community, and every day it gets a little bit bigger. And each time we add, whether it's a farmer or a consumer into that community, we get stronger. What's happening now is it takes a life of its own. And so, I think what more could any founder ask for?
Awesome. Last question for you, Thaleon, and it is about people who feel inspired by this conversation to take inspiration to the next level and put it into action, but not in a temporary kind of way. If they're challenged and inspired to go and try to build something, or collectively, use their resources to establish something similar to Pachamama, or what are the first steps that they need to take, even if, not even just new organizations, but an organization that's currently established that wants to kind of switch things up and bring in farmer equity, bring in more sustainable long-term change. What are some pieces of advice that you would have for them?
Great question. I think, I think we should all just reconsider the word partner, and what does that really mean? Everyone talks about partnering with their farmers and what have you, but I think partnership is much deeper than that. And so, I think it's time for everyone to consider when they use language like that, and when they really want to have this kind of inclusive partnership and this real balance in their business, to think about the fundamentals, the ownership, specifically, who are the shareholders, who are the stakeholders, so there's the financial equity, and then there's the power, and that's in the boardroom, and how does that get aligned? And if just one guy's in charge, well, a lot of people are going to depend on one guy who makes those decisions. So thinking about these things now, it's important. And if you're just starting out, I think it's a great time to think outside the box, right? And to say, hey, what if these producers or this group had some ownership stake, or participation in the boardroom, or both, that's got to be baked in the beginning in a lot of ways. And it doesn't have to be through a cooperative model. It could be a lot of other ways to do it, and a lot of different ways to organize a business, but those are the questions that we need to ask. And I think, I would encourage people to really think about true partnerships, and not just giving it lip service, but really, making a partnership over the long term, and working together with people to make things happen. And I think your business will be better for it. Now, for those that are already established, I realize it's a little harder to go back and rewrite the ownership bit. Doesn't mean you can't issue some shares though to producers, but I don't think there's any reason you can't, to tell you the truth. But investors may not want you to do that, right?
Right.
I could see there being some problems if you're a publicly traded company and you wanted to issue shares to farmers. So, but again, what you can do at least is begin to put some power in the hands of those farmers and those producer groups. So, and by that, you can put them in the boardroom and give them a real vote and give them a real say, and not just a token seat in the boardroom, but a vote and a voice. And that, again, anyone can do that, all the way up to the biggest coffee corporation in the world if they wanted to. I don't see any reason why they couldn't do that. And in fact, I would make the argument that it makes you better and makes you worth more, and that your stock price would probably go up if you did it, because you get a better, you're just going to get better advice in the boardroom, and you're going to see things differently, and you're going to begin to, once those partnerships take root, then you've got something that really is resilient. And in this business, I think we all need longevity, and we'll keep those supply chains from breaking. And so I think the way to make those supply chains strong is having this real ownership and partnership and empowerment throughout the chain.
Well said. Yeah. And we might actually start to see problems get solved long term. And
well, exactly.
Yeah. That's kind of what we
and
want.
it's the thing. It's a long-term problem. I mean, look, folks, it's going to take 50 to 100 years. I know that, but yeah, that's why we have to start now. We got to plant the tree now, because it's going to be a big tree in 100 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's going to be a small tree 10 years from now. But these short-term solutions don't work, and until we can balance out sort of the capital sort of power situation between producers and consumers, really nothing's going to change. So I think it's just the kind of thing, we tried everything else. We know what kind of works in capitalism. So, we know what works.
Right. Man, well, I'm just really thankful for what you all are doing in Pachamama and the example that you've set over this past 16 years. And it's inspiring to those who want to take that same journey, and the difference that it's made in the industry is so great. And I've really appreciated having this conversation. I'm really glad that we got to explore this as a singular topic. So how can we stay in touch with you and what's going on at Pachamama as you continue to grow this tree?
Well, thank you for all your kind words. It's really an honor to speak on this topic and to represent farmers that built this business. You can find us at pachamamacoffee.com, and we've got all the usual social media handles there. You can email me directly at info@pachamamacoffee.com, or pick up the phone and give us a call. We're happy to share what we know about what we've done. We're not shy about that. There's nothing to hide. I think the more people doing this kind of thing, the better it's going to be for everyone, including Pachamama.
Well, thanks again for sharing with us today, Thaleon. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
Well, I hope that you all enjoyed that episode and that it gave you some ideas of how you could start investing into ways of bringing farmers into the boardroom, bringing farmers into your business with equity, or if you're in the position where you're about to start something and you can bake in the inclusion of farmers in a meaningful way to your model, this is the kind of thing that really creates long-term solutions for problems that have been plaguing the industry for a long time. I love what Thaleon was talking about in terms of building a 100-year company. I mean, gosh, 200-year company, why not? And basically having patience in the process and being faithful to do the work in spite of if you get this recognition or it's bright and loud and in your face. It's obvious that Pachamama over these couple of decades now has been making a huge impact. And I hope that others take that example and also invest into these meaningful long-term solutions. So a huge thank you to Thaleon for joining us on the show. If you want to learn more about Pachamama Coffee, you can go to their website, pachamamacoffee.com, and you can follow them on Instagram at Pachamama_coffee. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback about this episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, please feel free to email me. Chris@keystotheshop.com is the email to use. And that's also where you can reach me if you're interested in working with Keys to the Shop Consulting. Chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, one of the things that I just got back from doing was Coffee Fest in New York City. It's the first show of 2022, and it was really great to be back in New York after the last show in New York was right before the pandemic. And one of the things that really made it so great, it was the community of coffee. Everybody is having conversations that are basically making each other better professionals and kind of better people, you know. It's a great thing to be surrounded by people who have a common passion, and it's the kind of thing I wish that you would experience too. If you go to coffeefest.com, you can see where there's going to be 3 other shows coming up this year. One in Chicago, one in Los Angeles, and then another, the last one this year, in Seattle. Coffee Fest has been doing these shows 3 to 4 times a year for 30 years. They have crafted what I think is probably the best resource for people to get equipped and resourced well to run a great coffee bar, free and accessibly priced trainings, lectures, and workshops, competitions, community, the trade show floor. It's all amazing. And you go to coffeefest.com to learn more about each one of those shows. And when you register, you can use the code KEYS to get 50% off your registration fee. And I hope to see you at one of these shows this year. Again, go visit them for more information over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I hope that you were inspired by Thaleon Tremain of Pachamama Coffee. Remember to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. Share these episodes with a friend. If you want to leave a 5-star rating or review on iTunes, it's always fun as well. Thanks again. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.